The cold evening breeze rustled through the streets of Manhattan as Henry Caldwell stepped out of his sleek black Rolls-Royce. The billionaire's sharp, silver-streaked hair barely moved in the wind, but inside, he felt an unfamiliar tremor. His heart, usually encased in steel, now pulsed with something dangerously close to sorrow that he hadn't planned to stop here. Not in this part of town. But then, he heard it. A song, not just any song. Her song. The delicate notes of a haunting melody floated through the night air, wrapping around him like a ghostly embrace. It was the song his late wife, Evelyn, used to hum in their quietest, most intimate moments. The same melody she played on their grand piano, the one that filled their home with warmth before she was taken from him too soon. His sharp blue eyes scanned the sidewalk, searching who was playing that song. And then he saw him, that a young street musician, no older than 25, sat cross-legged on a worn-out stool. His fingers danced over the strings of a battered guitar, his voice raw yet mesmerizing. Dark, tousled hair fell over his forehead, and his deep brown eyes carried an uncanny intensity. Henry felt something twist inside him. There was something familiar about this boy. The billionaire stepped forward, his Italian leather shoes clicking against the pavement. The crowd barely noticed as he approached, but the musician did. The moment their eyes met, the music faltered, a strange flicker passed between them. Recognition, curiosity, something unspoken. Henry cleared his throat, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. "Where did you learn that song?" The young man hesitated, gripping the guitar a little tighter. "It's an old tune. My mother used to sing it to me." Henry's breath caught. His throat felt dry, his pulse hammering against his ribs. Evelyn never shared that song with anyone, but he took a slow step closer. "Your mother, what was her name?" The musician's gaze darkened, guarded yet curious. "Her name was Margaret." Henry staggered back as if he had been struck. Margaret, Maggie, the woman he had loved before Evelyn, the woman he had left behind, the woman he had never forgotten. And if this boy was her son, then he was his son too. Henry's world tilted. His breath hitched as he stared at the young man, whose guarded expression mirrored the storm raging in his own chest. Margaret, Maggie. The name alone sent him spiraling back 3 decades. Back to a time before billion-dollar deals and luxury skyscrapers, before his name carried weight in boardrooms across the world. Back to a summer of stolen moments, whispered promises, and a love that was never meant to last. His hands clenched into fists at his sides. "Could it be Margaret?" Henry repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. The young musician tensed, his fingers tightening around the guitar. "You knew her?" "Knew her? She was my first love. The one who had held his heart before duty, ambition, and an arranged marriage pulled him away." Henry swallowed hard, keeping his emotions in check. "Where is she now?" The musician's gaze darkened, his jaw tightening. "She passed away last year." The words hit Henry like a freight train that he felt an ache deep in his chest. A mix of grief, regret, and something even more painful. Maggie was gone. The woman he had once dreamed of building a life with was gone. And this young man, if Maggie had a son around 25 years old, could he really be mine? Henry's voice was hoarse when he spoke again. "What's your name?" The musician hesitated before answering. "Daniel." Daniel. The name settled deep inside Henry, echoing like a memory he should have had, but never did. The sudden gust of wind rustled Daniel's dark hair. And for the first time, Henry noticed the shape of his jaw, the piercing intensity of his gaze. There was something in the boy's face, something that reminded him of himself. A shiver ran through him. This wasn't just coincidence. This wasn't just a street musician playing an old melody. This was fate knocking on his door. Henry struggled to steady his breathing. He had faced boardroom wars, media scandals, and ruthless billionaires. But standing here, staring at this young man who might be his son, he felt utterly powerless. Daniel watched him warily, shifting his weight on the stool. His fingers hovered over the guitar strings, but the song had stopped. The night felt colder now, heavier. "Why are you asking about my mother?" Daniel's voice was sharp, defensive. Henry hesitated. What was he supposed to say? Because I once loved her? Because I might be your father? The words wouldn't come. Not yet. Instead, he forced himself to take a slow breath. She was someone I knew a long time ago. Daniel frowned. You don't look like the kind of guy who knew my mom. Henry almost smiled at the bluntness. He definitely had Maggie's spirit. People change, Henry said carefully. Daniel studied him, his dark eyes unreadable. You're acting like you've seen a ghost. Because I have that Maggie's face flashed in his mind. Her laughter, the way she used to lean in close when she whispered secrets, the way she had looked at him like he was the only man in the world. And now, the closest thing left of her was standing right in front of him. Henry swallowed hard. That song, it was special to me. I need to know, where did your mother learn it? Daniel's expression flickered with something. Curiosity, confusion. She told me it was a song from her past. Said it was from a man she once loved. Henry's chest tightened. Daniel exhaled, looking away. She never talked about him much. I always wondered why. A sharp pang of guilt shot through Henry. He had left Maggie behind. He had chosen duty over love. And now, he might be staring at the life he had missed out on. His mind raced. Could he tell Daniel the truth? Before he could decide, Daniel spoke again. Why do you care? His voice was quieter this time. Suspicious, but also searching. Henry looked at him, torn between the weight of the past and the possibilities of the future. He had to know the truth, and there was only one way to find out. Daniel, he said slowly, would you be willing to take a DNA test? Daniel blinked. A DNA test? His voice was sharp, edged with suspicion. What the hell for? Henry hesitated, knowing that whatever he said next could change both of their lives forever. But was it fair to drop this on him like a bomb? His mind raced through different ways to soften the truth, but none seemed right. So he took a steadying breath and did what he had built his empire on. Honesty, even when it hurt. Because I think I might be your father. The street buzzed around them. Honking cars, distant chatter, the hum of city life. But between them, everything fell silent. Daniel's lips parted slightly, but no words came out. His fingers tightened around his guitar as if it were the only thing keeping him grounded. Then he laughed. A short, hollow sound. You think you're my father? You? A billionaire in a $3,000 suit. Henry didn't flinch. Yes. Daniel shook his head, disbelief clear in his eyes. This some kind of joke? What? You just walk up to street musicians, throw money around, and claim to be their long-lost dad? Henry stepped closer. Your mother, Margaret, was the love of my life. I was young, ambitious, and I made a terrible mistake. I left her. But if there's even a chance that you're my son, I need to know. Daniel's expression wavered, but his defenses shot back up fast. My mother never talked about my father. Not once. And now some billionaire shows up and expects me to believe he was in love with her. Henry exhaled. I don't expect you to believe me, but I'm asking you to consider it. Daniel's jaw clenched. There was anger in his eyes, but beneath it, there was something else. Doubt, curiosity, hope. He looked away, his fingers drumming restlessly against the guitar. Then, after what felt like an eternity, he muttered, and if the test says we're not related? Henry met his gaze, unwavering. Then you never have to see me again. Daniel studied him, his dark eyes unreadable. Finally, he nodded. Fine, let's do it. The following days passed in a blur. Henry had arranged for the DNA test to be done quickly, both for his sake and Daniel's. They met at the lab, standing side by side in an awkward silence as technicians swabbed their cheeks and sealed the samples. The tension between them was palpable. Neither said much, but there was an unspoken understanding now. Neither of them was walking away unchanged, regardless of the result. As the technician packed up the samples, Henry couldn't help but glance at Daniel, his mind swirling with what-ifs. What if the test proved he wasn't Daniel's father? What if this whole wild notion was a mistake? But even the thought of that possibility filled him with a strange sense of loss. A loss he had never prepared for. Daniel seemed unfazed, standing with his arms crossed, staring at his shoes. His expression remained unreadable. Was he already prepared for the answer he expected? Or was he silently praying for something more? Henry couldn't read him, and that frustrated him. In the past, he had been a master at reading people, anticipating their next moves, predicting the outcomes of his deals and negotiations. But this was different. This was personal. When the results were ready, Henry's heart hammered in his chest. He stared at the envelope in his hands, the official seal staring back at him. The words he was afraid to read danced in his mind, taunting him. What if he was wrong? What if he had been chasing ghosts all along? He opened the envelope slowly, peeling the paper back with trembling fingers. Daniel stood across from him, his eyes locked onto the paper, waiting for the verdict. Henry scanned the results, his eyes skimming over the words that would change everything. The test confirmed what he had already feared. The young musician staring at him across the room was his son. That a shockwave hit him, a violent jolt of emotions crashing through his chest. Daniel was his son. He looked up from the paper, his voice trembling. It's true. Daniel's face was frozen, as though he hadn't processed the words yet. He stared at Henry, his expression flickering between disbelief and something deeper, something more vulnerable. You're my father, Daniel said softly, his voice a mix of wonder and confusion. Henry nodded slowly, the reality of it settling in. All these years, he had lived a life of ambition and success, but it had come at the cost of this. This relationship, this legacy, this chance to raise a son. Daniel's eyes narrowed slightly. Why didn't you ever try to find me? Why wait until now? Henry opened his mouth to respond, but the words felt stuck in his throat. How could he explain the choices he had made? How could he justify his silence, the distance he had kept? I made mistakes, Henry said, his voice rough with emotion. I was young, ambitious, and I let my dreams blind me to what really mattered. But I'm here now, and if you'll let me, I want to make things right. Daniel stared at him, taking it in. His expression was unreadable, but his lips twitched slightly. Was that a hint of a smile? I don't know what to say, Daniel murmured. You don't have to say anything right now, Henry said. But I want you to know that I'm not going anywhere. The next few days felt like a blur to Henry. He couldn't shake the feeling of his own disbelief. He had a son he had never known existed. Yet here he was, standing before him. The weight of the years he had missed hung heavy on his heart. Daniel, too, seemed to be grappling with the revelation. He had taken the news with quiet detachment, but Henry could see the strain in his eyes. It was the look of someone trying to make sense of a sudden, overwhelming truth. They hadn't spoken much since the DNA results came back. Henry had reached out a couple of times, offering to meet, to talk, but Daniel remained elusive. Each time he texted or called, the responses were brief. Daniel was trying to process things in his own way, and Henry understood that. After all, what could a man like him say to a son he had just met? On the third day after the test results, Henry decided it was time to stop waiting. He reached out again, this time with a simple offer. Let's meet. Just us. I want to get to know you. When Daniel agreed, Henry's heart skipped a beat. It was a small step, but it was a step nonetheless. They decided to meet at a small cafe in the city. Quiet, unassuming, and far from the world that Henry lived in. It was the kind of place that reminded him of Maggie, the kind of place she had loved when they were young and carefree. It seemed fitting. When he arrived, Daniel was already there, sitting by the window with his guitar case beside him. The moment Henry stepped inside, Daniel looked up, his gaze unreadable. He hadn't changed since the last time they saw each other. Same dark eyes, same hardened expression, like a young man too familiar with the world's disappointments. Henry approached the table slowly, taking a seat across from him. The silence between them was thick, heavy with the weight of all the unspoken words. You don't have to be here if you don't want to, Henry said, his voice soft. But I'm here, and I want to listen. Daniel took a deep breath, glancing down at his guitar case before meeting Henry's eyes again. What do you want me to say? I don't want you to say anything, Daniel, Henry replied. I just want to know who you are. I don't expect anything from you, but I want to hear your story. All I can offer is my time, and whatever else you're willing to give me. Daniel was quiet for a moment, his fingers drumming nervously on the edge of the table. Finally, he sighed. I don't even know where to start. I mean, I've lived my whole life without you. My mom did everything for me. She didn't tell me about you. She never told me who you were. For years, I wondered why. Henry's heart clenched at the mention of Maggie. He could feel the old pain creeping in, the guilt that had never truly gone away. I know I can never make up for what I did, but I want to be here for you now, if you'll let me. Daniel's gaze softened, though it was still guarded. It's not that simple, you know. I know. Henry nodded, but I'm not going anywhere. And I'm not asking you to forgive me right away. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, a nervous habit Henry recognized from when he was young. I just don't know what to do with all this. You were some rich guy who lived his life, and my mom was just, well, she was just trying to keep me safe. She didn't need anyone else. Henry could see the bitterness, the resentment. But there was also something else, an underlying fear. Fear of being let down. Fear of the unknown. He had no right to ask for anything, but he knew he had to try. I wasn't there when you needed me, and that's something I'll regret forever. But I want to know you, Daniel. You don't have to believe in me, but you deserve to know the truth. I'm not asking for your forgiveness, just for a chance to be a part of your life, even if it's in the smallest way. Daniel stayed quiet for a moment, his face still unreadable. Then, to Henry's surprise, he reached into his guitar case and pulled out a sheet of music. He slid it across the table to Henry, who looked at it, confused. "What's this?" Henry asked. "It's the song," Daniel said softly. "The one you used to hear. My mom's song. The one she sang for you." Henry's breath caught in his throat. He reached for the paper, his fingers trembling slightly as he recognized the music. It was a melody he had forgotten for so long, but now it came rushing back to him. The late nights when Maggie would hum it to him, the soft look in her eyes when she sang. It had been their song. Henry looked up, his voice barely a whisper. "Why didn't she ever tell me about you?" Daniel hesitated. "She said it was too painful, that you weren't ready for a family, that you were too focused on your business. But she loved you. I think she still did, even after everything." Henry swallowed hard. She had never stopped loving him. And now he was faced with a son he hadn't known existed, a son who had inherited his mother's music, her spirit, and perhaps her love for him. "I don't know how to make this right," Henry said quietly, "but I want to try." Daniel didn't answer right away, but there was a soft shift in his expression. Something had cracked. Something had opened. "I'm willing to see where this goes," Daniel said finally. "But I can't promise anything." That was all Henry needed to hear, that it wasn't a resolution, not yet. But it was a beginning. The days that followed were filled with tentative steps. Henry found himself overwhelmed by the reality of reconnecting with Daniel. Each moment felt fragile, as though one wrong move could shatter whatever progress they had made. But he was determined to rebuild, to offer something real, something stable. Daniel, for his part, seemed to struggle with the idea of having Henry suddenly appear in his life. He wasn't used to having a father figure, and Henry could see that. The boy's walls were thick, and understandably so. After all, Henry had been absent for his entire life, and he wasn't sure if a few conversations or gestures would be enough to break those walls down. Despite the heavy silence that often hung between them, Henry made a point to reach out. He didn't push too hard. He knew better than that, but he sent messages every now and then. "How's the music going?" Or, "Do you want to grab a coffee sometime?" Simple, non-intrusive things. Daniel had a few of his own walls to break down. He began to open up slowly, bit by bit. It wasn't much, but it was progress. When Henry asked about his music, Daniel told him about the gigs he played in small clubs and the songs he wrote. He was talented, no doubt, but Henry noticed the hesitation in his voice when he spoke about his art. It was almost as if he didn't want to acknowledge his own potential. Why? Henry wondered. Was it fear? A sense of inadequacy? Or maybe the weight of being the son of someone he had just discovered? One night, Henry decided to surprise Daniel. He had seen a small venue in the city where Daniel was scheduled to perform. It was a cozy, intimate space that catered to young musicians. Henry had already arranged for a private seat at the back of the venue, away from the crowd, so he could watch without drawing attention. When Daniel stepped onto the stage, guitar in hand, the audience grew quiet in anticipation. Henry watched as his son adjusted the mic, his face lit by the soft glow of the stage lights. For a moment, he could see glimpses of Maggie, the same spark in her eyes, the same passion she had for life and music. Daniel began to play. The song was hauntingly familiar, yet different from the one he had shown Henry. It was his own creation, a melody woven with his own experiences, his own pain, his own longing. As the notes filled the air, Henry closed his eyes, letting the music wash over him. It was in that moment that he understood. This was Daniel's way of reaching out. His music was his language, his voice when words failed. After the performance, Henry waited for Daniel to finish packing up his equipment. He didn't want to disturb him during his set, but now was the time to talk. Daniel spotted him as he was leaving the stage. He didn't seem surprised, but there was a guarded look in his eyes. "You didn't have to come," Daniel said, his voice hesitant. "I didn't ask for it." "I know," Henry replied, "but I wanted to hear you play. Your music is beautiful, Daniel. It's a part of you. I want to know more about you, about who you are." Daniel paused, studying him. The walls were still there, but they were slowly starting to crack. "Maybe," he said softly, "I'll tell you more someday. But for now, I don't know where to start." "I'm not going anywhere," Henry said, his voice filled with sincerity. "Whenever you're ready, I'm here." Daniel gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod. It wasn't a promise, but it was something. And that, for Henry, was enough. The two of them walked out of the venue together, a sense of quiet understanding between them. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't easy, but it was a beginning. As the weeks passed, their bond deepened slowly but surely. There were still moments of tension, moments when Daniel would retreat into a shell and Henry would wonder if it was all just too much too soon. But each time Daniel pulled away, Henry let him. He knew it would take time for the young man to fully accept the reality of their relationship. It wasn't until one afternoon, several weeks after their first meeting, that Daniel invited Henry to visit his apartment. It was small, nothing fancy, but it was Daniel's space, a space that Henry had no right to intrude on. Yet here he was. "Come on in," Daniel said with a sheepish smile. "I want to show you something." Henry stepped inside, glancing around. The walls were adorned with photos of family and friends, music posters, and old records. It was clear that music was the heart of this place. Daniel led him to a corner of the room where an old, worn guitar sat propped up against a chair. "This was my mom's," Daniel said quietly, his voice laced with emotion. "She used to play it for me when I was younger." Henry reached out, his fingers brushing over the strings of the guitar. It was worn with age, the wood cracked in places, but it still had a warmth to it. "She loved this guitar," Daniel continued. "She said it was the first gift you ever gave her. After everything that happened, she never played it again. But I've been trying to." Henry swallowed hard. The guitar was a symbol of his past with Maggie, the love they once shared, the dreams they had built together. He hadn't expected to be standing here, holding this piece of history in his hands. "I didn't know," Henry whispered. "I didn't know she kept it." "She did," Daniel said, his voice softer now. "And it meant something to her, even after everything fell apart." For a moment, there was silence between them. Henry's heart ached with the realization that so much had been left unsaid, so much had been lost. But as he looked at Daniel, the young man who now stood before him, the son he had never known, he felt something stir deep inside him. This was his chance to make things right. "I'm sorry, Daniel," Henry said, his voice breaking. "I wasn't there when you needed me, but I'm here now. I'll always be here for you." Daniel met his gaze, his expression still guarded, but softer than before. "I'm willing to try, too," he said quietly. "Maybe we can make up for some of the lost time." And just like that, Henry knew they were on the right path. The road ahead would be long and full of challenges, but they had made a promise to each other, a promise to rebuild what was broken, together. It had been 2 months since Daniel had invited Henry into his life, and though their relationship had grown stronger, the road ahead remained uncertain. Both father and son had made tentative strides toward healing, but there were moments when old wounds seemed to reopen, and trust was still something that needed to be earned. As Henry walked into his office one morning, his mind was preoccupied with thoughts of Daniel. He hadn't expected the journey to be easy. He had assumed there would be bumps along the way, but he wasn't prepared for the wave of guilt that seemed to overwhelm him at times. He thought about how much he had missed, how many years had been lost. The morning's meeting dragged on, but Henry's thoughts were elsewhere. At one point, his assistant, Carla, pulled him aside. "Mr. Holden, I've got the details for your meeting this afternoon," she said, a concerned look on her face. "It's with Daniel. He's requested your presence at one of his shows. Something about getting his music noticed." "Thank you, Carla," Henry said, though he wasn't entirely sure he was prepared for the next step. After all, Daniel had never outright asked for his help before, and Henry wasn't sure if this was a test or a genuine invitation to be a part of his world. Either way, he wasn't going to turn down the opportunity to show his son that he cared. That afternoon, Henry found himself backstage at one of the smaller, more intimate venues Daniel had performed at. He was nervous, his palms sweating as he waited for the show to begin. It wasn't his first time hearing Daniel perform, but it felt different now. He no longer saw the music as just a talent his son had. It was the connection between them, a bridge that was slowly starting to span across the gap of years. "Dad." Daniel's voice interrupted Henry's thoughts as he entered the dressing room. His son stood there, adjusting his jacket, looking every bit the artist he was. There was a slight tension in his posture, but it didn't hide the warmth in his eyes. Henry smiled, trying his best to hide his nerves. "Hey, Daniel, you look good. Are you ready for tonight?" "I'm as ready as I can be," Daniel said, the smile on his face wavering just a little. "But I want you to know this is important to me. I've been trying to get noticed for a while now, and tonight it could be a big step." Henry could hear the unspoken pressure in his voice. He knew the stakes were high for Daniel, and he wasn't sure what to say. Instead, he placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "I'm proud of you. Just go out there and do your thing. I'm here to support you, no matter what." Daniel gave him a tight nod, as if the words meant more than he let on. "Thanks, Dad." The concert hall was packed that evening. The low murmur of the crowd grew louder as the lights dimmed. Henry sat in his seat, feeling a mix of emotions. The air was thick with anticipation, and his heart raced as he watched Daniel walk onto the stage. His son was no longer the kid he had abandoned years ago. This was a man who had found his voice and was determined to be heard. As Daniel began to play, the first few notes of the guitar seemed to hold the crowd in a collective breath. Henry couldn't help but be moved. He had heard the song before, but tonight it felt different. Tonight, the music spoke of their journey, the pain, the distance, and the hope for reconciliation. For the first time in what felt like forever, Henry allowed himself to feel proud, not just of the music, but of the person his son had become. Every strum of the guitar seemed to heal a little more of the brokenness between them. When the performance ended, the crowd erupted into applause, and Daniel looked out over the audience, his expression a mixture of relief and joy. For a moment, he locked eyes with his father, who was sitting at the back. Henry smiled, offering a small but meaningful wave. After the show, Daniel came off the stage and approached Henry. There was no denying it now. Something had shifted between them. The walls were still there, but they no longer felt impenetrable. Daniel had invited him into his world, and for the first time, Henry had stepped into it without hesitation. "You were incredible," Henry said, his voice sincere. "Thanks," Daniel replied, a quiet smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "You actually came. I didn't think you would. I told you I would be here." "I meant it," Henry replied. Yes, they spoke. Henry could sense the underlying change. The walls that had stood between them for so long were beginning to crumble, not in a dramatic way, but in small, meaningful moments like this. There was still a long way to go, but for the first time, Henry believed they could make it. "I want to show you something," Daniel said, leading him to a small, quiet corner of the venue. It was a place no one else seemed to notice, where the music was still echoing faintly in the background, but the energy was more relaxed. Daniel pulled out a small, worn notebook and handed it to Henry. "This is something I've been working on. It's for you. For us, really." Henry opened the notebook, and his eyes scanned the pages filled with lyrics. Lyrics that spoke of loss, hope, and the possibility of redemption. He looked up at his son, surprised by the vulnerability in his words. "These are your thoughts," Henry said, his voice soft. "Your feelings. You've been holding on to this for a while, haven't you?" Daniel shrugged. "I guess I just didn't know how to share it. But I think you should see it now." Henry was moved more than he could express. This was more than just music. It was a message, a bridge that Daniel had extended to him, a way of connecting in the only way he knew how. Music had been the language they both understood all along. "I'm glad you showed me this, Daniel," Henry said. "You don't have to hide who you are. You don't have to carry all of this alone." Daniel looked down at the floor, his emotions evident on his face. "I'm trying, Dad. I really am." And just like that, something changed in Henry's heart. He knew it would be a long journey, filled with hard conversations and mistakes, but they had taken the first step together. Would you like to continue with Chapter 10? The healing journey is beginning to take on a new meaning for both father and son. It was a week after Daniel's performance, and the small, intimate venue where he had showcased his talent seemed to mark a turning point for both father and son. Though the night had been filled with music, it was the quiet moments afterwards that had left the deepest impressions. Henry knew that something had shifted between them, but he also realized that the real work was only just beginning. That morning, Henry woke up early, the soft rays of sunlight filtering through his office windows. He had always been a man of routine, but his thoughts were more scattered than usual as he reflected on everything that had happened in the past few months. His relationship with Daniel was far from perfect, but there was progress. The walls that had once stood so tall and firm between them were now slowly crumbling. Piece by piece, the knock at the door interrupted his thoughts, and Carla, his ever-efficient assistant, entered with a stack of papers. "Morning, Mr. Holden," she greeted him, setting the papers on his desk. "We got a busy day ahead. The quarterly report is due soon, and we're still working on the legal issues with the building development project." Henry nodded, acknowledging her. He had always prided himself on being a workaholic, but he had learned over the last few weeks that there was more to life than deadlines and board meetings. Still, the work had to be done. "I'll get to it," he said, his mind still lingering on the recent conversation with Daniel. "Can you also schedule some time for me to meet with Daniel this week? I think we need to talk more about his music career, how I can support him." Carla raised an eyebrow, but said nothing, just giving him a nod before she left. Henry hadn't realized how much he'd been holding on to, but now that Daniel was part of his life again, he knew it was time to make sure that his support wasn't just in words, but also in actions. The afternoon passed in a blur, and as the workday came to an end, Henry couldn't stop thinking about the next step with his son. He had given Daniel space, but it was clear that if he wanted to truly be a part of his life again, he would have to show up more, be present. That evening, Henry received a message from Daniel. It was simple and to the point. "Hey, Dad, do you have time to talk tomorrow? I've been thinking about what you said." Henry didn't hesitate. He quickly typed a response. "Of course, son. I'll make time. Let's meet at the cafe near the park. I'll be there at 10 a.m. The next morning, as Henry arrived at the cafe, he was struck by how much Daniel had changed. The young man who had once walked away from him was now standing in front of him with a new sense of confidence. It was as though Daniel had found his footing, both in music and in life, and Henry felt a mixture of pride and guilt. He couldn't help but wonder if his absence had been a reason for some of the struggles Daniel had faced over the years. "Morning, Dad," Daniel greeted him, his eyes bright. "I was thinking, maybe we could work together on some stuff. Not just music. I mean, I got ideas, and I know you've got experience. What if we combine both?" Henry was taken aback by the suggestion, but also intrigued. "What exactly do you mean?" he asked, taking a seat across from Daniel. "Well, you know how you've been so involved in the business world all these years, right? Maybe you could help me understand some of the things I'm missing when it comes to managing my career. Not just the music side, but the financials, the branding. I know I need help with that." Henry's heart swelled with a new sense of purpose. He had always been business-minded, but he never imagined that Daniel would reach out for his guidance. It wasn't just about fixing the past. It was about creating something new together. "I think that's a great idea," Henry said, a smile forming on his face. "We'll work through the details. But you know, Daniel, this will take time. We'll have to make sure we balance your vision with practical steps. You can't rush success. And you also have to stay true to yourself." Daniel nodded. "I know, but that's the thing, Dad. I want to be true to myself. I want to make sure my music speaks for who I am, not just who I think people want me to be." Henry could see the sincerity in his son's eyes. This was no longer just about success. It was about passion, about connecting with the world in a way that felt authentic. For the first time, Henry realized that he wasn't just helping his son. He was learning from him, too. The conversation continued, and by the end of their meeting, they had outlined a plan. Daniel would continue to perform, but Henry would help him structure the business side. Everything from financials to branding to negotiations with potential music labels. It wasn't going to be easy, but Henry had the tools and knowledge that his son needed, and Daniel had the drive and passion that Henry could only admire. As they parted ways that morning, Henry felt a sense of relief. For the first time, it felt like they were working together, not as strangers, but as father and son with a shared goal. Back at his office later that afternoon, Henry couldn't stop thinking about the conversation. He knew the road ahead wouldn't always be smooth. There would be challenges, setbacks, and moments of doubt. But for the first time in a long while, he felt a renewed sense of hope. It was as if their relationship had come full circle. What had once been broken was now something that could be rebuilt piece by piece. His phone buzzed with a new message, and he saw that it was from Daniel again. "Thanks for today, Dad. You've got my back, and that means more than you know." Henry smiled and quickly typed his response. "Always, son. We're in this together." The next few weeks flew by in a blur of meetings, practice sessions, and long talks between father and son. They met regularly to discuss Daniel's music and how to approach the business side of things. The connection between them was growing, not just because of their shared goals, but because of the understanding they were beginning to develop for one another. Daniel found himself opening up more than he had in years. The barriers that had once stood between him and Henry were beginning to fall, and he could see his father in a new light. No longer was he just the distant, unapproachable billionaire. He was someone who genuinely cared about Daniel's future, someone who was willing to guide him. For Henry, the experience was just as eye-opening. At first, he had been unsure of how to be a part of Daniel's world. But as they worked together, Henry found himself re-examining his own motivations. His son had a perspective on life that was different from his own, a more emotional, creative, and passionate approach. It made Henry realize that there was more to success than just making money and building empires. Sometimes true success was measured by the impact you had on the people around you. As the days passed, Daniel's music began to evolve. He wasn't just playing for the sake of performing anymore. There was a sense of purpose behind his songs. With his father's help, Daniel started to fine-tune his business strategy, considering everything from merchandise sales to building his brand on social media. But most importantly, Daniel was still true to his art. His performances weren't just about fame or money. They were about sharing a piece of himself with the world. One evening, as Henry watched Daniel perform in a local venue, he felt a profound sense of pride. It was the first time he had truly seen his son live in action, and there was something in the way Daniel played, so raw, so vulnerable, that left him speechless. The crowd was enthralled, not just because of his talent, but because they could feel the authenticity of the music. After the show, Daniel came off the stage, wiping the sweat from his brow. "How was it?" he asked, looking at Henry with a mixture of excitement and uncertainty. Henry stood up from his seat in the back and made his way toward Daniel. The applause from the crowd was still ringing in his ears, but it was Daniel's question that mattered most. "It was incredible," Henry said, his voice thick with emotion. "I've never heard you like that before. It's not just the music, it's your soul. I can see it, and I think the world will, too." Daniel smiled, a bit shy, but his eyes sparkled with gratitude. "Thanks, Dad. I really mean it. I couldn't have gotten here without your help." Henry shook his head. "No, Daniel. You were always capable. I just helped you see that." It was a moment of pure connection, a moment that transcended music and business. It was about trust, mutual respect, and love that, as the months went on, Daniel's career began to gain momentum. His songs were getting attention on streaming platforms, and he was being offered gigs at more prestigious venues. With Henry's guidance, he was also negotiating deals that were more favorable to him, making sure that his artistry was never compromised for financial gain. But even as Daniel's career soared, it wasn't without its challenges. There were moments of doubt, moments when the pressures of the industry seemed overwhelming. But Henry was there, always ready with advice, but also knowing when to step back and let his son find his own way. The balance between fatherly guidance and letting Daniel make his own decisions was something Henry was still learning, but he was determined to get it right. One evening, Daniel called Henry to share some exciting news. "Dad, I just signed a record deal with one of the top labels in the country," he said, his voice practically shaking with excitement. "That's amazing," Henry exclaimed, unable to contain his own excitement. "But remember, this is just the beginning. The real work is in maintaining your vision and staying true to who you are." Daniel laughed. "I know. I've learned a lot from you about business, but I'm still going to write music that comes from my heart." Henry smiled to himself. His son had learned the most important lesson of all. Success wasn't just about the end goal. It was about the journey, the connections you made, and the integrity you maintained along the way. But even with all the success, there were still lingering moments of doubt. Daniel found himself questioning whether he was doing the right thing, whether his career was really fulfilling him, or if he was just chasing after something that others expected of him. One quiet night, he called Henry again, this time sounding less certain. "I don't know, Dad," he said, his voice lower than usual. "All of this success, it feels great, but sometimes I wonder if it's enough. I don't want to be known as just another musician. I want to be someone who makes a difference." Henry, sensing the weight in his son's voice, paused before responding. "I get it, Daniel. I really do. But I think you're already doing it. Every time you take the stage, every time you share a piece of yourself with your audience, you're making a difference. The world doesn't need another perfect story. It needs honesty, vulnerability, and the courage to keep going, even when it's tough." Daniel fell silent for a moment, reflecting on his father's words. And then, with a deep breath, he spoke again. "Thanks, Dad. I needed to hear that. I think I'm starting to understand what you've been trying to teach me all along." As the weeks turned into months, both Henry and Daniel realized that while their journey had been anything but traditional, it had led them to a place of mutual understanding. The distance that once separated them had closed, and in its place was a relationship built on respect, trust, and love. They were no longer just father and son. They were partners in this strange, beautiful journey of life. And though the road ahead would always have its challenges, Henry knew one thing for sure. He would always be there for Daniel, just as Daniel had always been there for him, through every high, every low, and every lesson they learned along the way. As the days turned into months, Daniel and Henry found themselves adjusting to a life that was increasingly in the public eye. The success of Daniel's music was undeniable, but with it came a barrage of attention, both from the media and the fans who had followed his rise from street performer to star. For Daniel, the world he was stepping into was exciting, but it was also daunting. Fame was something he had never fully considered when he first picked up a guitar on that city street corner. For Henry, it was a familiar world. His years in the business world had prepared him for high-pressure environments, constant scrutiny, and the demands of public life. But even with his experience, the complexities of managing his son's burgeoning career were something he had never anticipated. The balancing act between protecting Daniel's privacy and helping him seize opportunities was a constant challenge point one afternoon. As the two sat together in Henry's office, they discussed the latest developments in Daniel's career. "I've got another interview tomorrow," Daniel said, his voice a mix of excitement and apprehension. "It's going to be broadcasted live, and they want me to talk about my upbringing, the whole rags to riches story. I don't know if I'm ready for that." Henry leaned back in his chair, contemplating. "It's going to be tough, son. They'll want to dig into your past, into every little detail. But you've been through a lot. You've got a story to tell. Just remember that you don't owe anyone the full picture. Share what you're comfortable with, and don't let anyone push you beyond your limits." Daniel nodded, though a part of him still felt uneasy. His past, the one he had left behind when he moved to the city, was something he preferred to keep private. It wasn't that he was ashamed of it. It was just painful. But the constant pressure to open up for the public's curiosity was starting to wear on him. "I just don't want people to see me as a tragedy or a story to be exploited," Daniel confessed. "I want them to see me for who I am now, not just the struggles I've faced." Henry understood that. He had spent years being seen as more than just a businessman. He had been a figurehead, a symbol of success. But in his heart, he knew that the most important thing was always the person behind the image. And for Daniel, that was the key, being true to who he was in the face of all the outside noise. "You don't have to explain everything to anyone," Henry said. "You're your own person, and your story is yours to tell on your own terms. The interview came the next day, and it went better than Daniel had expected. He spoke candidly about his rise to fame, but he was careful not to delve too deeply into the painful parts of his past. The interviewer was respectful, allowing him to share what he felt comfortable with, and the conversation shifted to his music and his future. To be why the time it was over, Daniel felt a sense of relief. He had done his way, and as the interview aired, the audience responded with warmth and admiration. They saw him not just as a talented musician, but as a person they could relate to, a person who had worked hard to get where he was. Henry watched the interview from his office, feeling a swell of pride. He had seen his son grow from a street musician to a performer with a voice that resonated with people. And now, he was seeing Daniel navigate the complexities of fame with grace. Henry knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but he believed in his son's strength to handle whatever came his way. However, fame came with its own set of challenges. Soon after the interview, the media storm intensified. Tabloids picked up on the smallest details of Daniel's life, and rumors started swirling about his personal relationships. Every interaction, every choice he made was scrutinized by the public eye. Daniel had always prided himself on being an open book, but now he was realizing that some parts of his life needed to stay private. There were nights when he lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if it was all worth it. The pressure was immense, and the constant need to be on top, to meet the expectations of others, felt like a weight on his shoulders. One evening, as he sat alone in his apartment, Henry called to check in. "How's everything going, son?" Henry's voice was warm and steady, offering a sense of comfort. "I'm just tired," Daniel admitted. "It's hard to keep up with everything. The interviews, the performances, the constant pressure. I don't know how much longer I can handle it." Henry was silent for a moment, understanding the gravity of his son's words. "It's not easy, I know, but you don't have to do it all alone. We'll figure this out together, okay? You don't have to carry this burden on your own." Daniel smiled faintly. "Thanks, Dad. I really appreciate you being there." As the months passed, Henry and Daniel developed a more structured routine to manage the demands of Daniel's career. They hired a public relations team to handle media inquiries, which gave Daniel more breathing room. He also began to focus more on his music, taking time off in the constant promotional cycle to write new songs and refine his sound. Daniel's music became a reflection of the inner peace he was beginning to find. His latest album was deeply personal, exploring themes of love, loss, and self-discovery. It was his most honest work yet, and when it hit the charts, it resonated with fans on a whole new level. At one of Daniel's concerts, Henry stood backstage, watching his son perform with a sense of pride that was hard to put into words. He had always known Daniel had talent, but now he was witnessing something far deeper. His son had found his purpose. The music wasn't just a way to make a living. It was his way of connecting with the world, of leaving a piece of himself behind. After the show, Daniel approached his father, a grin on his face. "You were watching, huh?" Henry chuckled. "I wouldn't miss it for the world." Daniel paused for a moment, taking in the crowd, still buzzing outside the venue. "You know, I used to dream about this, being on stage, having people listen to my music, but I never imagined it would feel like this. I never imagined I'd feel so at peace." Henry put a hand on his shoulder. "You've earned every bit of it, son. And the best part is, you're doing it your way." Daniel nodded. "I guess I'm finally figuring out who I am, and it feels good." As Daniel's career continued to flourish, he never forgot the lessons he had learned along the way. The music industry was filled with highs and lows, but the key to surviving it all was to stay true to yourself. With Henry by his side, Daniel knew that no matter what challenges came their way, they would always find a way to navigate them together. As Daniel's fame soared, so did the interest in his personal life. Fans and paparazzi alike were eager to know everything, from his music to the relationships he formed. He had always been private when it came to matters of the heart, but the spotlight had a way of forcing even the most reserved to open up. His romantic life had always been a subject of speculation, but Daniel had kept his relationships out of the public eye until he met someone who made him want to share more of his world. Her name was Mia, a fellow musician who had been opening for him on his recent tour. Mia was confident, fiercely independent, and had a sense of humor that put Daniel at ease from the first moment they met. She wasn't starstruck by him, nor did she seek any publicity from their relationship. They connected on a deeper level, sharing their passion for music, their dreams, and their struggles with the pressures of fame. But despite the connection they felt, Daniel wasn't sure how to navigate this new chapter of his life. Being with Mia felt natural, yet there were complications. The public's insatiable hunger for details about his love life made him hesitate. Every time they went out for dinner, or when Mia attended his concerts, the media made it their mission to snap photos, speculate about their relationship, and turn into a headline point one evening. After a sold-out concert in New York, Daniel and Mia sat quietly in a corner of a small cafe, away from the flashing lights of the cameras outside. It was their first real moment of solitude in weeks, and Daniel was grateful for it. "I don't think I've had a moment to breathe in months," Daniel said, running a hand through his hair. He looked at Mia, the woman who had brought some semblance of normalcy into his chaotic world. "It's like every time I turn around, there's another headline, another rumor, and I don't know how to handle it anymore." Mia reached across the table, placing her hand gently on his. "You're only human, Daniel. I think that's what people forget. They see you on stage, in the media, but they forget you have your own life outside of all that." "We both do," Daniel nodded, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. It's hard to keep that balance. It's hard to stay grounded when everything around you is constantly changing. Mia smiled softly. "That's the tricky part, isn't it? We have to find our own balance, together if we want to. Fame doesn't have to change who you are. It can just be another part of the puzzle, not the whole picture." Despite their quiet moments of reflection, the pressures of their public lives began to show. Tabloids continued to circulate rumors about their relationship, some true, some wildly exaggerated. There were whispers about Mia being a gold digger because of her growing association with Daniel, and others speculated that their relationship was just for show, designed to enhance their careers. IKT was exhausting for both of them, but particularly for Daniel, who had grown used to being judged for everything he did. Now, with Mia by his side, the scrutiny was even more intense. Point one evening, after another round of paparazzi photos made the rounds, Daniel sat with Henry, who was always the voice of reason. They were in the living room of Henry's penthouse, the city lights twinkling outside the window. "How are you holding up, son?" Henry asked, leaning back in his chair, his tone a mixture of concern and support. Daniel exhaled heavily. "I feel like I'm suffocating sometimes, Dad. It's one thing to be in the spotlight for my music, but now it feels like my every move is being watched. Mia's been great about it, but I don't want her to get caught up in all this nonsense. She didn't sign up for this." Henry nodded, understanding the burden his son was carrying. Fame could be a heavy weight, but when your mom and I were starting out, we faced similar challenges. People didn't always see us for who we were. They saw the public personas. But what matters is who you are when the lights go off. What matters is how you treat each other. Daniel looked out the window, pondering his father's words. "I know, Dad. I just don't want to lose myself in all this. I don't want to lose Mia in the process either." Henry placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "The key is to keep a sense of self, son. Never let the world define you. And don't let the noise drown out what really matters. You and Mia need to decide what's best for both of you. It's your life, your love." The next day, Daniel and Mia sat down to have a conversation about their relationship. They had avoided discussing their public life for a while, but now, with the pressure mounting, it was time to address it head-on. "Mia," Daniel began, his voice steady but with a hint of concern. "I don't want you to feel like you have to deal with this circus just because we're together. You didn't ask for this. And if it's too much, I'll understand. I don't want my life to bring you more pain than it's worth." Mia looked at him, her expression soft but determined. "Daniel, I've never been afraid of what people think. I'm not going anywhere. I want to be with you, not because of the headlines or the fame, but because of who you are. We got to figure this out together, not apart." A sense of relief washed over Daniel as he realized how deeply Mia understood him. She didn't want the fame or the attention. She wanted him, unfiltered and genuine. I don't know what the future holds, but as long as we're honest with each other, I think we can handle whatever comes our way," Mia added, squeezing his hand gently. Daniel smiled. "I'm glad you're in this with me." As time went on, Daniel and Mia learned to navigate the complexities of their relationship in the public eye. They made an agreement to keep their personal lives private and only share what they felt comfortable with. It wasn't always easy, and there were moments when the media's invasion of their privacy was overwhelming. But through it all, their bond only grew stronger. Daniel had learned that fame wasn't everything. What mattered was the love he had in his life, his family, his music, and Mia. The rest, he realized, could be handled with time, patience, and a little bit of help from the people who truly cared about him. As the months passed, Daniel and Mia's relationship became a beacon of stability amid the storm of fame and the pressures of the entertainment world. But while their love grew stronger, so did the complexities they faced. Navigating life in the public eye was never simple, and though they had found a rhythm, the challenges were far from over. The evening after Daniel's latest concert in Los Angeles, Mia and Daniel sat in the quiet of their hotel suite, a glass of wine in hand, reflecting on the past year. "I can't believe how much has changed in such a short amount of time," Mia said, looking out over the glittering skyline. "It feels like we've been through so much together already." Daniel, always the more introspective of the two, leaned back in his chair, considering her words. "Yeah, it's been a roller coaster. The music, the public attention, the highs and lows. But I wouldn't want to go through it with anyone else." Mia smiled at him, her eyes soft and affectionate. "I know we've had our moments, but we're doing okay. We just need to keep our focus on what's important, us." Daniel's gaze flickered for a moment. "What if the pressure gets worse, Mia? What if we can't handle it anymore?" Mia reached across the table and placed her hand on his, her touch steady and reassuring. "We'll handle it. Together. I know it's not easy, but we've already made it this far. Besides, we've got each other." There was a quiet moment between them, a rare instance of peace in the chaos of their lives. The following week, Daniel was invited to speak at a prestigious charity gala, an event that would bring together some of the biggest names in the entertainment industry. It was an honor, and Daniel was excited to use the opportunity to speak about the causes he was passionate about. But Mia could sense the anxiety building inside him. "Are you sure you're okay?" Mia asked, noticing his unease as they prepared for the gala. "You've been quiet all day." Daniel hesitated before answering. "I'm just thinking a lot. I know this is an important event, but I'm not sure I'm ready for all the eyes on us. I don't want it to feel like another publicity stunt, you know?" Mia nodded understandingly. "I get it, but you're not in this alone. We'll face it together. If we focus on why we're there, on the cause and the message, it'll be worth it. We can make a difference, Daniel. Just focus on that." He looked at her, grateful for her unwavering support. "Thanks, Mia. I really need you by my side for this." That night, the gala was a sea of flashing cameras, well-dressed attendees, and velvet ropes. But Daniel felt something different this time. He didn't feel the usual weight of the world on his shoulders. Instead, with Mia standing beside him, he felt like they were a team, partners in every sense of the word. As he stepped onto the stage to give his speech, Daniel's nerves vanished. His words flowed effortlessly, speaking from the heart about the causes he supported, about using fame for good, and about the importance of giving back. The crowd was captivated, and for the first time in months, Daniel felt like he wasn't just performing for an audience. He was making a real impact. When he finished, the applause was thunderous. But it wasn't the applause that filled his heart. It was the smile on Mia's face from across the room. Her support was everything. The aftermath of the gala marked the beginning of a new chapter in Daniel and Mia's relationship. Their bond, already strong, was fortified by their shared experiences. They knew that the journey ahead wouldn't be easy, but they also knew they were capable of weathering any storm together. However, not everyone was thrilled about their growing relationship. The media, always quick to seize on any story, began to scrutinize their every move more than ever. Tabloids ran stories claiming that their relationship was a publicity stunt, that Mia was using Daniel to further her own career. It wasn't long before the pressure became too much, and cracks began to show point one evening. Daniel sat alone in his dressing room before a show, the sound of the crowd outside slowly growing louder as the concert neared. He ran a hand over his face, exhausted not just from the physical demands of touring, but from the mental strain of constantly defending his relationship with MIA.IT. Was then that his phone buzzed with a new notification. Another headline, another rumor. Daniel Thompson's relationship with Mia under fire. Is it all for show? Frustration welled up inside him. He had been doing everything he could to keep their relationship private, but it was becoming impossible. The public wanted answers, and no matter what he did, it felt like he couldn't escape their judgment. Mia entered the room just as he was about to throw the phone down in frustration. She could see the tension in his face. "What happened?" she asked softly. Daniel tossed the phone onto the couch. "Another story. Another rumor. I can't keep up with this, Mia. I just want us to have a normal life. But it's like we can't even have a quiet moment without the world judging us." Mia walked over to him, placing a hand on his shoulder. I know it's hard, but you can't let this destroy us. We have to stay focused on each other, not the headlines. We know it's real. We have to remember that." Daniel sighed, feeling the weight of the world on his shoulders. "I just don't want you to get hurt by all this. I care too much about you." Mia gave him a reassuring smile. "I'm not going anywhere, Daniel. We'll face this together. I love you, and nothing is going to change that." Their love had withstood countless challenges, but Daniel knew that the hardest tests were still to come. As they continued their journey together, they would face even greater obstacles, challenges that would test not just their love for each other, but their strength as individuals. But no matter what came their way, Daniel was sure of one thing. Mia was the one person he wanted by his side through all. And together, they would find a way to navigate the storm, knowing that love, at the end of the day, would always be the anchor that kept them grounded. As the months passed, Daniel and Mia's relationship was under increasing scrutiny. Every move they made, every appearance was analyzed and dissected. The media was relentless, and the constant pressure was starting to take a toll. Despite their best efforts to remain grounded, the storm around them showed no sign of slowing down. The tour had taken them to New York City, and as Daniel sat backstage before a major performance, the weight of everything pressing down on him became overwhelming. The headline from the previous day's tabloid screamed, "Daniel Thompson and Mia. Love or publicity stunt?" Daniel ran a hand through his hair, pacing back and forth. Mia was supposed to meet him after soundcheck, but he felt trapped in his own mind. He needed to talk to someone who could understand what he was going through. Mia walked in just as he collapsed onto the couch, his hands in his lap. The concern in her eyes was immediate. "Hey, what's going on?" she asked, her voice soft but tinged with worry. "I can't take it anymore, Mia," Daniel replied, his voice tight with frustration. "It's like everything we do is being torn apart. Nothing feels real anymore. I just want to focus on my music, but it's all about us. About our relationship. I don't know how much more of this I can handle." Mia sat down beside him, her presence calming. "I know it's hard, but what they're saying, it's not real. It doesn't define us. We define us." Daniel looked at her, the desperation in his eyes. "But what if it's too much? What if they're right? What if we're just two people in a story they've created?" Mia gently took his hand in hers, squeezing it tightly. "We're not a story, Daniel. We're real. We're not here to please anyone. We're here for each other." She kissed him on the cheek before standing up. "And we're going to keep pushing forward. Together." The concert that night was a whirlwind. Daniel gave it his all, the music flowing through him like it always did, but it wasn't enough to shake the weight of everything else. The crowd cheered and screamed his name, but there was a hollow feeling inside him. He couldn't stop thinking about the stories. The rumors. Mia, ever supportive, stood off to the side of the stage, her eyes never leaving him. It was clear to anyone who looked that they were more than just a couple. They were partners, unified in a world that seemed intent on pulling them apart. As the final notes of his encore rang out, Daniel looked out into the sea of faces. There were flashes of cameras, but it was Mia's unwavering gaze that calmed him. The world could say whatever it wanted, but in this moment, there was only one truth. He loved her, and she loved him. Later that evening, As they walked back to their hotel, Daniel's mind still raced. The city's lights shimmered all around them, but his thoughts felt clouded. Mia noticed his silence. "Hey," she said softly, her voice just above a whisper. "I know it's tough, but you don't have to carry this on your own. We're in this together." Daniel looked at her, his heart swelling. "I don't know how you do it. I don't know how you stay so strong." Mia smiled, her eyes twinkling with warmth. "Because I believe in us. In you." The next day, the tabloids had a new headline. This one was different. It wasn't a rumor, but rather an attempt to twist their love story into something darker. The headline read, "Is Daniel Thompson's relationship a convenient distraction from his career?" Daniel's heart sank as he stared at the article on his phone. They had turned his love for Mia into something cold, calculating. It stung. Mia sat beside him as he read through the article, her hand resting on his arm. "We can't let this get to us, Daniel. They don't know what we have. They don't know what we've been through." Daniel let out a deep breath, trying to steady himself. "I just want to make music. I just want to live my life with you. Why does it have to be so complicated?" "I know," Mia said gently, "but we've got each other. And no matter what they say, we'll be okay. We've been through so much, and we'll get through this too." The days that followed were a blur of rehearsals, interviews, and more tabloid stories. It was exhausting, but despite the constant attacks, Daniel's resolve was strengthening. Every moment with Mia was a reminder of what truly mattered. And he wasn't going to let the media tear that down. One evening, after a particularly rough interview where the reporters tried to press him about his relationship, Daniel found himself retreating to his hotel room, feeling drained and frustrated. Mia entered, as always, bringing a sense of peace with her presence. She closed the door softly behind her and walked over to where Daniel stood by the window, his back to her. "Hey," she said quietly, "you okay?" Daniel turned around to face her, his eyes filled with emotion. "I don't know how much longer I can do this. The questions, the pressure, it's all getting to me. I feel like I'm losing myself in it all." Mia walked up to him, cupping his face in her hands. "You're not losing yourself, Daniel. You're just in a battle. It's a hard one, but you're not fighting it alone." She kissed him gently, her lips warm and reassuring. "We'll get through it. I promise." Despite the media circus, despite the rumors and the pressure, Daniel and Mia's love only grew stronger. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy, but together, they knew they could face anything. In a world full of chaos, they had found their anchor in each other. And for Daniel, there was no greater victory than that. As the weeks passed, Daniel's sense of self began to fray at the edges. The pressure from the media, the public's constant scrutiny, and the relentless rumors were starting to take their toll on him. He was finding it harder and harder to separate his personal life from his career. The constant juggling act was beginning to wear him down. It was an afternoon rehearsal, and Daniel stood at the center of the stage, guitar in hand, staring blankly at the empty seats. His bandmates were busy preparing, but his mind was elsewhere, far away from the music. He could hear the faint murmur of voices outside the rehearsal hall, but none of it reached him. All he could hear was the constant echo of the media's questions, the whispers of doubt. Mia walked into the room, her usual energy and smile instantly brightening the space. But even her presence couldn't chase away the storm brewing inside him. She noticed immediately. "Hey," she said softly, walking over to him. "You okay?" Daniel ran a hand through his hair, sighing heavily. "I don't know, Mia. I feel like I'm losing myself. Like I'm not just Daniel anymore. I'm the guy dating Mia. The guy who has to defend every move he makes." Mia reached out, placing a hand on his shoulder, grounding him. "I know it's hard, but you're not losing yourself, Daniel. You're just being challenged. This moment, it doesn't define you. You do, but it's not just the moment," Daniel muttered, his voice thick with frustration. "It's everything. The media, the rumors. I can't even be myself anymore without it all being twisted. I just want to play my music and live my life with you, but I feel like I'm drowning in this circus." Mia's expression softened, and she stepped closer to him. "I get it, Daniel. I really do. But you can't let this define who you are. You're still the same guy you were before all of this happened. I know it's tough right now, but we'll get through it together." Daniel looked into her eyes, searching for some kind of reassurance, but even her words couldn't settle the turmoil inside him. He needed more than just encouragement. He needed a solution. He needed a way out. "I just need to figure out what I want," he confessed, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if I can keep doing this. I don't know if I can keep pretending everything is okay when it feels like I'm losing control." Mia placed her hand on his chest, steadying him. "You don't have to figure everything out right now. Take it one day at a time. Focus on what you can control, your music, your passion. That's the real you." That night, after the rehearsal, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that something was changing within him. The constant buzz of his phone, the never-ending notifications, the invasive media, it was all too much. He felt the need to escape, to get away from it all, even if only for a short while. That he made a decision then, without fully understanding its weight. He would take a break. Not from Mia, not from the music, but from the chaos. He needed a moment of clarity, a chance to breathe without the constant pressure. The next morning, Daniel packed a small bag, leaving behind the flashing lights and constant noise of the tour. Mia knew something was up when she found him by the front door, suitcase in hand. "Where are you going?" she asked, her voice filled with concern. "I need some time away, Mia," Daniel said quietly. "Just a few days to clear my head. I can't keep living like this. I need to figure out who I am without everything else clouding my thoughts." Mia's face softened, but she understood. "Okay," she said gently, "but promise me you won't shut me out. We're in this together. Don't forget that." Daniel smiled weakly. "I won't forget. I just need a little space to breathe. I'll be back before you know it." Daniel spent the next few days at a quiet cabin by the lake, far away from the noise of the city. The silence was deafening at first, but it soon became a balm for his soul. The weight of the world that had been on his shoulders started to lift, and for the first time in months, he could think clearly. He spent hours walking along the shore, playing his guitar by the water, and reflecting on his life. His thoughts, which had been clouded by the chaos of his fame, began to clear. He realized how much he missed the simple things, the music, the moments with Mia, and the peace that came from just being himself. By the time he returned to the tour, Daniel was a changed man. He felt grounded, more in control of his own identity. The pressure was still there, but it no longer had the power to dictate his life. He had found a new strength within himself, a quiet confidence that came from knowing who he truly was, beyond the tabloids, the rumors, and the expectations. When he met Mia again, standing backstage before his next performance, he could see the relief in her eyes. "You're back," she said, smiling warmly. "I'm back," Daniel replied, his voice steady. "And I'm ready to face this. All of it." They shared a quiet moment before the performance, the weight of everything that had happened between them settling into a shared understanding. Together, they could face whatever came next. The night was electric with anticipation as Daniel stood backstage, preparing for his next performance. The sound of his bandmates warming up drifted through the walls, but his mind was miles away, focused on the next chapter of his life. He had just returned from his brief retreat, and while he felt stronger, there was still a gnawing feeling of uncertainty deep within him. Mia walked up to him, her eyes searching his face for any signs of the struggle that had been weighing on him. Since his time away, there was a visible shift in him, a sense of calm and purpose that hadn't been there before. But Mia could sense the tension in the air. She knew the battle wasn't over. "Hey," she said softly, her hand resting on his arm. "You doing okay?" Daniel turned to her, offering a small but genuine smile. "Yeah, better than before. I feel like I've been given a second chance to figure things out. But there's something I need to talk to you about." Mia's eyes softened with concern, but she nodded. "What's on your mind?" Daniel took a deep breath. He wasn't sure how to say it, but he knew it had to be said. "I'm thinking about taking a step back from the spotlight for a while. Not forever, just long enough to recalibrate. I need to find a way to balance my life with the music without everything feeling like a performance." Mia's heart skipped a beat. She had always known the pressures of fame were hard on him, but hearing him say it out loud made the weight of it all feel more real. "Are you sure?" she asked quietly. "I mean, I support you no matter what, but this could change everything. Your career, our relationship, I know. Daniel said, his voice steady. "But I've realized that I've been living for everyone else's expectations. It's not enough anymore. I want to live for me, for us. I want to be with you, Mia. Without the distractions, without the media." Mia's eyes softened with understanding. She had always supported Daniel's dreams, but she also wanted him to find peace, to be the man she knew he could be without the constant stress. "I think you deserve that," she whispered, her hand gently caressing his cheek. "Whatever decision you make, I'll be by your side." The decision wasn't easy, but Daniel knew it was the right one. He spoke with his team and his label, explaining his desire for a temporary hiatus. At first, they were hesitant, worried about the impact on his career. But after much discussion, they agreed to his request, understanding the toll that constant pressure could take on an artist. With the decision made, Daniel felt a sense of relief wash over him. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was taking control of his own life. As the weeks passed, Daniel spent his days focusing on his music, his personal growth, and most importantly, his relationship with Mia. They spent more time together, quiet mornings with coffee, walks in the park, and evenings spent talking about their hopes and dreams. It was a life he had never truly allowed himself to experience until now. The world outside was still buzzing with rumors, but Daniel no longer cared. He was finally able to breathe, to live without the constant noise. And as he focused more on his own happiness, he realized just how much he had been missing. He had missed the simplicity of life, the joy of living in the moment, and the deep connection he shared with Mia one evening. As they sat by the lake, Daniel turned to Mia, his eyes filled with sincerity. "I've been thinking about something," he began, his voice steady. "I know we've been through a lot together, more than most couples ever face. But I want to take the next step with you. I want us to build a future together, not just survive through the chaos." Mia's heart skipped a beat. She had always known Daniel was special, but hearing him speak those words filled her with a warmth she had never known before. "You mean, you want us to—" "I want to be with you, Mia. In every way. I want to build a life with you. Not just as your boyfriend, but as your partner. No more distractions, no more doubts." Tears welled up in Mia's eyes as she looked at him, seeing the man she loved, strong, vulnerable, and willing to commit fully to their future. "Yes," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I want that too. I want to be with you always." The weeks turned into months, and Daniel's decision to step back from the spotlight proved to be the right one. He found a new rhythm in his life, one that allowed him to focus on the things that truly mattered. His relationship with Mia grew stronger, and his music flourished in new, unexpected ways. He no longer felt like he was living for anyone but himself. But as much as he enjoyed his time away from the spotlight, he couldn't ignore the pull of his passion for music. The time away had given him perspective, and he knew he was ready to return. But this time, he would do it on his own terms, without the chaos, the pressure, and the constant need to prove himself. The night before his big comeback performance, Daniel stood in front of the mirror, adjusting his jacket and taking one last look at himself. For the first time in a long while, he didn't feel the weight of the world on his shoulders. He felt free. Mia walked up behind him, wrapping her arms around him. "Are you ready?" she asked, her voice full of love and support. "I am," Daniel replied, turning to face her. "And I know whatever happens next, I'll be okay, because I have you by my side." Together, they stepped into the next chapter of their lives, ready to face whatever came their way.